Thank you for all being here. I thought maybe there'd be a smaller crowd because like half of, it's a good number of people are out working at Noble Weeding right now, working on a site that some way will be comparable to the one we're going to hear about. Okay. Certainly the personalities involved in this one were more colorful. Our speaker today received her bachelor's from ISU 2002. ISU is also out in the field working at Noble Weeding right now. And her master's from the University of Illinois in 2007 has been at the Illinois State Archaeological Surveys as an AP academic professional since 2006, and our expert ceramic analyst since that time. She's got wide-ranging interests in woodland, Mississippian, upper Mississippian, and she's taken on the responsibility of seeing an incredibly important report, super historically significant site. What else can I say to make Larry happy? To fruition. She's also opening up kind of a new season of brown bags. It's kind of like a good TV show. You never know when the new season's going to start. It's starting. Mike Smith is doing the organization, and Mike Lewis has kind of arranged everything and has done the setup. So thank you both, and let us welcome our speaker, Kjersti Emerson.
Is Chris here? Okay. All right. So, we're talking about the Orendorf site. I know how to make it special. It is the Pompeii of North America. Okay, so the Orendorf site is located in Fulton County in western Illinois. It's situated on a bluff overlooking a backwater lake of the Illinois River called Rice Lake. The site was first brought to archaeologists' attention about a century ago because it's got a series of mounds up here that obviously people didn't miss. Eventually, a series of Middle Mississippian settlements would also be located in association with the mounds by Larry Conrad and Thomas Emerson and their crew of students and underage youths. We'll be focusing primarily on what was likely the last of these settlements, Settlement D, which was catastrophically burned and has been fully analyzed recently. However, first I want to briefly cover the burial mounds, as I'm sure there are some members of the audience who might be interested. Chris isn't here, though. There were 9 mounds in all, located on U.G. Orendorf's farm. These had been pitted and looted here and there for quite a while before the University of Chicago, came to survey them in 1931. In 1937, locals Charlie Cooper and his son Bill began digging around into about 5 of these, recovering a treasure trove of materials and great information. Years later, these men gave Larry Conrad the opportunity to view their collections and pick their brains, and thus began the whole Orendorf project we're discussing here years later. Out of these series of mounds on the bluff, only 7 of the 9 recorded are actually believed to be associated with the Orendorf site. These are mounds 410 through 416, and I'm sorry I don't have a better map or anything of these. University of Chicago's records were lost, and I didn't have time to track down any kind of
They didn't map every mound group.
Yeah, I got the impression there were just some dots, and I couldn't find a figure of it. So,
and those dots are, well, we got to put some dots here.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So I just kind of left you guys staring at this. But these pretty much contain the vast majority of the Orendorf phase interments. That's where they buried their dead. And they were presumably in use throughout probably the occupation's history. Archaeologists systematically excavated 2 of the 7 Orendorf mounds. Here's one picture. The first mound, 416, was trenched by Charlie Cooper in the 1930s. Further excavations into the mound were undertaken by Conrad in 1969, and again by Conrad Emerson and his crew in 1975. These various excavations uncovered what had most likely been what they interpret as a charnel house that was built upon a ceremonial clay-capped platform mound. Although I'm not sure that's exactly what they settled on, because there's been a lot of reinterpretations of every part of this site over the years. Do you know? Oh, darn it. Okay. All right. The charnel structure had been burned mostly down, but appears to have been actually covered with soil before it was completely incinerated. And according to Conrad, I believe, there's evidence of actually later intrusive burials into that mound, even after the charnel house had been burned and the thing had been covered up, based on looter pits into the mound turned up unburned bones later, right?
There are a few.
Yeah. Okay, it's hard to tell.
There are a few unburned fragments that.
Okay, yeah, so, oh well, okay. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, settlement A underneath turned out, or it wasn't fully excavated, but may have been an Evelyn phase?
There is radiant size and power.
Okay, so that's one of the multiple.
We've got a lady here working on it. So.
Great, okay, all right. That's wonderful. All right, so the second mound excavated, I don't have any pictures or anything, but it was 414, and it was partially excavated again by the Coopers in the 30s and 40s, and then again by Emily Blasingham in 1970, and then again over the course of 5 separate field seasons by Umvarf and the Wisconsin field crew seasons between 1986 and 1990. This mound was constructed differently. It had been built in 4 stages with different discernible strata. They called A, B, C, D. I think it's A, B, there's partial C, I think P, the plow zone. These are the best kind of illustrations I could find of it. Every time they had a strata, they dug into it to bury, covered it up, and then dug in to bury the next strata is what it looked like. So this one was excavated the most completely. About 10 to 20% of the total area was excavated, and about 189 individuals altogether through all these excavations are found. The burials excavated from these 2 mounds have been analyzed and have provided a good deal of information about Orendorf phase, like the health mortuary practices, and warfare. Given the final destruction of the settlements by fire, which we'll get into, this last bit about warfare is the most interesting to me. Donnie Stedman's skeletal analysis showed that violence and warfare were relatively common threats for those living at the Orendorf site. She found about 14 to 16% had signs of injury to interpersonal conflict, scalping, decapitation, inflicted projectile points, and antemortem cranial depression fractures. So they got their heads bashed in, and we'll talk about the violence later at the site. For now, we'll move on actually to the settlements, the land of the living. To the southwest of the mounds and settlement A, there are 4 to 5 more settlements located. There's B, C, and D, which were the ones most fully excavated by Conrad and crew over the years for like a decade. Let's see. Okay, so there's B, C, D, and then there's a BC, which was, in C, basically overlain. It's hard to locate. Is it like here?
Well, it's an occupation that we didn't recognize.
Exactly. Some of the houses were aligned differently.
C was built over part of it, and
Yeah.
then part of it was
Exactly.
beyond the excavation.
And then later, that's why I say 4 or 5, there's B, C, let's see, B, C, D, B, C. And then Greg, when analyzing D, was going through and saying, well, there's some houses here, and it may have been some other, and there's some up here, actually, that I'm not really going to get into, about 5 or 6 houses that are aligned differently and maybe something else. So there's a series of settlements, 2 of which were excavated for years. And this breaks down the year to year where they did everything. All right. So excavations led by Larry Conrad, Thomas Emerson, Sharon Santour, Jeanette Stevens, like lots of people over the years were conducted between 1971 and 1978 in these habitation areas. They exposed and recovered the majority of 2 of the large Spoon River Mississippian villages, Settlement C and D. Settlement C was largely reported on in 1981 in 3 volumes compiled by Larry Conrad and Dwayne Ezra, largely authored by Sharon Santour, give her credit. It too had instances of burned structures, but not to the extent of Settlement D, where the whole place was razed in one episode. So the focus of the present talk will be primarily on Settlement D, the westernmost settlement. Settlement D was the last occupation to be uncovered. Well, technically, it was the first. The very first house they dug at Orendorf, accidentally in a cornfield, was house 1 that turned out to be in Settlement D. And then they found the rest and then returned. But technically the last excavated. And it was probably the final occupation at Orendorf, destroyed at around AD 1250. It appears to have been subsequently abandoned completely. Settlement D covers about 14 acres altogether, and about 11.5 of those acres were stripped to plow zone and mapped, which represented about 70% of the palisaded town. Let's see, do I have yeah. Due to the rapid abandonment of the place and the fact that it remained largely undisturbed for centuries, the excavations revealed an amazingly well-preserved Mississippian settlement with household assemblages in place on the house floors. And here's a really cool house floor they cleared, and all the logs just in place, and it's really neat. And there's obviously a whole volume of information on this settlement, so I just want to cover the highlights, the cool parts, some cool parts, because there'll always be other parts I can't cover. But we're going to focus on bird house floors and the community layout and things. But one thing I want to get to right away, just clear up, because you're going to see it on the map and wonder what the heck it is the little stockade up there in the northeast corner. Yeah, here. You can see this. And they keep talking about it. What its relation to any of the settlements isn't clear exactly. It was empty except for a few centrally located pits that seem to be actually related to it, and this one house I think is actually related to it, because other things may just be blotches here and there, previous. Sharon mentioned in the 1981 report that it shares an alignment with Settlement BC, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was associated with that. It could have been another refuge area for Settlement C, because, I mean, it is palisaded with bastions, so it was a fortified little area, or it could have been a ceremonial area. There's no smoking gun that clears it up easily, but I just want to talk about this because it's interesting, and so I wanted to mention it before we move on. But Settlement D, which is this, it included 3 stages of occupation: the original occupation and the 2 subsequent expansion episodes. Initially, there were at least 20 small rectangular structures, 2 medium circular structures, 2 L-shaped structures, and 1 small cruciform structure. The main community layout followed the typical Mississippian pattern of the central plaza, surrounded by houses and public and ceremonial structures, as well as a center post in the central plaza. So, this includes expansion areas, but this is the cruciform, the elite community, the center post, which will come in later. The 2 large structures, 169 and 191, apparently served as a sort of unit of community or elite dwellings. And the cruciform structure in the eastern portion of the village, that was part of the original occupation, and it was likely a temple that held sacred fire. Cruciform structures have been located at the Evelyn site. This is the one from Orendorf, though. Near Dixon Mounds and at Cahokia underneath Murdoch Mound, I'm told. Both this cruciform temple, though, and structure 169 appear to have been abandoned completely and filled in pre-burning, so they weren't there at the end. But 191 was still standing. Another, even larger community house appears to have been built later on to replace the original 169, and that's called 210 up there. This structure was still in use when the occupation ended. Greg Wilson refers to this structure as, the bigger, better elite's dwelling, but Tom Emerson characterizes it as a community house, and I'm not clear if they agree on what it was, but are emphasizing different aspects of its function. They can argue that out.
Historically, the councils would be held in the chief's house.
Yes, and then in Greg's discussion of it, he calls it the elite dwelling without. So It's like, is it both?
Yeah, it's both.
Okay, yeah, so Dad's just, I figured
so.
so, and then Dad was emphasizing the communal, and Greg wasn't, so I figured they're probably not in disagreement. I wasn't sure. The vast majority of the structures, though, in Settlement D were, of course, rectangular wall trench houses, often with, what the heck? Oh yeah, this is structure 210. Here we go. And interestingly, there's not that much stuff in there. A lot of the households were filled with things, but this one isn't. If people are living in there, they're not leaving tons of stuff. But where's my wall? Here we can look at these. Okay. Those built during the expansion episodes were on average about 40 square meters larger than those built in the original occupation. So the households were apparently growing along with the overall village and the community house to accommodate a population increase. The first expansion was to the northwest, and the second was to the southeast. I tried to piece together what Greg and his student B. Geiger. It's not exactly clear unless you have an idea in your head exactly. There's this. And I don't think it is exactly clear. They exactly did this and then this. So, but they do know they built out this way from superpositioning and from the fact that the earliest bastions were circular. And following the sort of trend they see from circular to rectangular, the earliest were circular, then they see these other expansion middle episodes with semicircular or irregular. And then in the final, they're these rectangular. I don't know if you can actually see that, where you can see. So, yeah. So there were expansion episodes. They're not quite so clear-cut. But we do know the initial Settlement D, the original inside that black box, contained somewhere between, by their population estimates that B and Greg were doing, about 57 to 73 residents and at least 25 structures, while the final iteration of everything contained at least 72 houses. Greg postulating up to 100. It's never exactly clear what are we missing, not excavating. And a population of somewhere between 208 to 378. Very precise numbers, but, these numbers are all squiggly, so take it with a grain of salt. But trying to absolutely assign each house to an expansion episode also was a bit difficult, which is the about this, about that. Was this actually closed? Did this burn earlier? But in the end, when the village was set ablaze, at least 57 standing structures were destroyed. Household assemblages were left in place among the charred timbers, and when excavated, were carefully piece-plotted on detailed floor maps. This is what it will look like in the report. It's filled with lots of labels and makes it difficult, so I wanted to show you. When you take away the labels, kind of layout of floor space and things. Structures typically contained interior pits, although some part of the center area of the house seemed to have been kept clear for sleeping or movement. Although, reading Tom Emerson's conclusions, he seems to suggest they weren't doing much in there but storing things and coming in out of inclement weather. And I don't know if he means to say that.
Storing their bodies at night.
Maybe, yeah, just like, I think they slept in there probably, but again, I don't know if it's a matter of emphasis. So I'll have to see what Dwayne and Larry say about that in his conclusion comments. Madeline and I analyzed 28 structures that we could identify were completely excavated and had been burned in the final conflagration. So we were trying to look for patterns of storage, gendered use of space, or whatever we could find. It's such a perfect sample that we wanted to see if we could see anything, obviously. And Alan Harn had speculated he saw women's areas versus men's areas of activity in Mississippian household. Do you remember Madeline Larson's site? Where was that? Thank you. Okay. I could not find the report. I know I'm right, but okay. We wanted to see if we could find evidence of that here because we've got a much better sample. And according to Dwayne, much better excavation methods. I'll say now we didn't really see that. We didn't find evidence of women versus men in this area, or being separated spatially, or women's activities and men's activities. And so obviously either gendered division of labor was not so strict, or gendered use of space was not strictly enforced, or we're not as adept at recognizing behavior based on materials as we'd like to think. But I think probably there wasn't any strict enforcement of women here, men there, this activity. What we did notice were use of storage areas and activities that may have taken place indoors versus outdoors, and cleaning behaviors. As to the latter point, generally the floors were kept clean of garbage. We didn't find floor zones trampled with sherds and flakes and things, and they must be cleaning it, sweeping it, which would make sense. You don't want to step on painful flakes. So instead, ceramics and lithics tended to be kept along walls, in corners, in interior pits, or sometimes near the center of the house. If there was a post, you'd find maybe a vessel that had been right there next to the hearth or the post, which would make sense. These have been instances, there have been instances of tools. Yes, okay. We assume those are instances of tools probably recently in use that had just been plopped down there. And when the fire broke out, things probably got shifted around a lot. So it was sort of a hassle trying to sort out what was supposed to be where it was, what had been dropped from the ceiling, what had been on the wall and collapsed in, or vessels especially, they shatter. And so we kept finding sections of vessels. You've got the entire base, but where the heck did the rim go? It's just not there. And so after a while, after that happened often enough, it was we were wondering, was the rim just being completely destroyed, or were Mississippians tending to not throw out a broken vessel just because it's broken? I mean, you can still use the base, or large sherds as scoops. You know, a broken jar can turn into a bowl base that you're keeping around the house. You curate it for a while, and then, because there's many of them. And so when 3/4 of a pot is gone, but there's this one huge body sherd, you know, is that an accident, or is that curation of things? And it makes sense. It makes sense to me, but, you know, I don't know what the fire destroyed or not. I haven't done a study on if you set these houses on fire, how detrimental that is to ceramics. What will survive and what won't? Will they just turn to powder? I'm not really sure exactly. As to activities taking place inside and outside the home, we noted that the households tended to have somewhat small assemblages of vessels, consisting primarily of jars. 27 of our burned structure sample had in situ vessel assemblages, but the majority of these had somewhere between 1 and 4 jars, and only 1 or 2 additional vessels, like plates or a beaker or a bottle or a bowl. Only 7 houses had 5 or more vessels inside. So most of the work of this went to Madeline. The overall vessel assemblage recovered, here's our burned structures. These are the ones we found. And these had particularly rich lithic assemblages. But the overall vessel assemblage recovered from Settlement D contains a minimum of 455 discrete vessels, with jars being the most common, representing about half of the assemblage overall, followed by bowls, plates, beakers, bottles, pans, a few funnels, indeterminate, probably mostly jars. The sizes of the jars varied from large storage containers to small cooking vessels and miniature pots. The largest vessels, those with orifice diameters of 29 centimeters or more, occurred overwhelmingly in structures and interior pits, and apparently were being used as storage vessels. The walls of these jars were frequently slipped or burnished as well, which may have made them more useful for holding water or other liquids, but they may have also just been used to hold maize, as the presence of large mortars in over about half the burnt houses analyzed suggested food was being processed indoors in these houses. Other ceramic distribution patterns included the tendency for beakers to be located indoors. 70% of beakers were recovered from house floors or interior pits. These were quite likely specialty vessels and were not used for everyday eating and drinking activities. I mean, this is supported by the recent study suggesting they may have been used for black drink. But of all the vessels, they show the strongest pattern, like they were just in houses. You didn't carry them around, shatter them, toss them. So, and people seem to keep these a lot. I think if they broke off, they must have been neat, and they kept them, because you find a lot of just handles. Or maybe they're just indestructible. But water bottles represent about 6% of the entire assemblage and are frequently on house floors and within interior pits. Bowls and plates were found in almost equal numbers and occurred more commonly in outdoor pits than inside structures, which may indicate a tendency for outdoor food consumption, assuming that bowls and plates were used for food serving. The plates are usually well crafted, often polished and decorated, and display a wide range of rim lengths. Additional ceramic objects included several pottery trowels on house floors. Quick aside, have you ever tried to use one of these to make pottery?
Oh, that's what that's for.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you just use it, you pound it.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah, on the clay wall.
Well, you know you have a paddle and anvil?
Yeah.
It's like the thing you're holding on the inside.
On the inside,
Yeah.
yeah.
I made one and tried to use it. It sticks to clay terribly. It is an awful anvil. So I didn't...
Why are you looking at me?
Well, you taught classes. You taught Aline, and Aline's doing all this, and I didn't know... I think pottery trowels all the
Gotta rub
time.
some bear grease on there.
I kind of thought that maybe I'm not doing this right. Like, these need to be, because they're so porous. Holding porous ceramics up to wet clay, it's like sticking like this. It's the worst. So I thought maybe a lot of these are lids, and a lot of them are flat. They're not curved like you would kind of want a little bit of curvature.
Well, maybe you need to let your clay dry a bit more before
That's
you
true, too.
bend it.
Yeah, it probably is user error.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's true. But I wanted to ask you about that because I wasn't exactly sure if there were any other floating theories out there about, like, these may have been lids or something else. Or what are those funnel lids? No, I know those don't look the same, but if there were other random things out there that we just, by default, call pottery trowels, but it's probably me. I probably couldn't make it very well. But we found these in houses, so we already know they're making pottery. But storing their tools inside at least, maybe making pots inside. And there were about 38 modified discs. Some discs were found on house floors and may indicate weaving activities inside the house. Yeah.
So
They're there.
weights, they're used like weights.
Yeah, spindle whirl kind of weights. Without the holes. What are they for? Are they just blanks waiting to be assigned a task?
Either blanks waiting to be assigned, because some of them are kind of partially drilled, or they're
Yeah.
using them as stoppers in the bottom of a funnel or something like that.
Okay, yeah. All right, multi-use. Okay. The lithic tools, we'll talk about those now, recovered from Settlement D, likely represent a reasonably complete cross-section of those manufactured and used. This impression is supported by the context of their recovery on house floors, obviously, as well as the unusual diversity and quantity of objects. Unusual items included block pipes, discoidals, exotic arrow points, a range of pipes that Amanda analyzed, and Larry, I know, is loved dearly, as well as unusual chert types. But the vast array of recovered lithic objects were those needed for just everyday life, of course. Orendorf villagers employed the same flake technology that produced triangular arrow points and end scrapers, typical of the time and region. Use points. The role of the bow and arrow in hunting and warfare and end scrapers for hide work characterize I don't know what that sentence meant. There's a lot of stuff for woodworking, scraping, arrow points. There's a lot of groundstone celts and other woodworking tools common on house floors. And of course, stone axes, like arrows, could also be weapons in warfare. Other lithic artifact types are more limited in their distribution, and in some cases, nearly restricted to burned structured floors. They generally occur in what we consider lithic-rich floor assemblages, including some combination of large sandstone mortars or whetstones, large block smoking pipes, unfinished groundstone, and finished groundstone items that were apparently awaiting repair. Structures that include one or more of these artifact types commonly have also about 20 or more cobble tools. Finished celts, adze, picks, and discoidals and galena also occur with many of these particular structure assemblages. Rich floor assemblages are actually more the norm than the exception among the structures we know to have burned. There were a lot of stone tools in the houses, and Madeline was brave and got through all of them and laid them out in clusters and did a great job. I should show more of those maps, but they are complicated. Like, let's see, here's the. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Structure 210 might not be a good example. But imagine if this had lots of blue everywhere, and it's. The maps are extremely detailed, and there were extremely large lithic assemblages everywhere. Where were we at? This one? This one? All right. I want to show you just a few examples of actual households with the pottery and lithic assemblages, but first, some distribution things we made to try to figure out what is going on. Because we have all these houses. So we broke things down into artifact types. First, just like, where is this stuff? We wanted to see, if you just put all the houses together, is there a zone that's always clean? You know, like, is there an entryway obvious? And maybe, not really. There's stuff, kind of spread out everywhere. There's not I guess the picture we get is that every household is its own unique little thing, and there's not a strict, this is what it is. This is how we do households. The doors are always here. You know, the women always work here. The men always work here. You sleep in this corner. There's stuff everywhere. So I tried to break it down into, where are they putting cooking stuff? So there's cooking jars everywhere. There's storage jars everywhere. The beakers and bottles were kind of weird. The beakers tended to be over here. You know, whether that means anything, beakers and bottles tend to be over here, and servingware, pans and plates and bowls tended to be on that side. I don't know if that's just an accident or not, but it's the only thing close to a pattern I could find ceramically. And Madeline, when she tore hers into different types, she's got mortars and metates everywhere, pipes around walls, but not here. Arrowheads.
Those are celts.
I'm sorry. So where's the arrowheads? Oh, arrows. Okay. Celts tended to be scrapers. Did you notice anything that was like a meaningful thing when you really think about it?
Well, I mean, it looks like the celts may have been stored on the walls or something.
Okay, yeah.
But sometimes they were outside the structure. So that may
Okay.
be like a wall falling.
Because I noticed on yours, like, hey, that one's the one that looks like
Yeah.
you may have found something there.
Also, the pipes being along the walls, I think, is pretty important in terms of just
Yes.
being someone's personal property or something like that. Or not
Or-
personal property, but being,
That's true.
Being stored in place. And
Yeah.
the fact that the mortars are all over the floors is probably a signal that they're in place. And then
Well, you don't move those around. I mean, those are huge things.
Yeah, and also that would have been something that you had to walk around.
Yeah, it would be an impediment. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Okay, so I mean, we wanted to show you guys these cool things. And so despite our efforts, I couldn't find any extremely obvious entryways, doorways, constant. What's up?
Well, with these, okay, so like with the mortars,
Which one?
the next
Did
one.
that? Okay.
So that's multiple houses. And multiple
Yes, I'm sorry.
Right. So there's like
I didn't
one or two
Yes.
in a structure.
Yes.
So
Yeah. We basically they're mostly aligned the same. If we just
right.
plop them down, if you stack up the houses, do you see patterns of where
So within
artifact
those-
types are?
Well, within those structures, so like if there's like a mortar here, is there generally a concentration in that area of tools associated? Like, you know what I mean? Like this is a designated area.
Area.
Right.
Yes, but then we were looking, is that, do all households follow that?
Sure.
You know, like this is
Sure.
what we do. We grind our corn in the
Sure.
southwest corner of houses. But yeah,
But if they had like a doorway that was facing onto the plaza or something.
that was,
They
yes,
could all be turned, oriented
exactly.
differently.
It was a matter of how do we orient these? Are we guessing the orientation right? You know, or should I be turning them this way or that?
Yeah.
So that would be a good project to do again, but okay.
So you are still seeing like designated activity areas, just
Yes, you see within a household, but it
Right.
doesn't necessarily carry over to this is what
Sure.
Spoon River Mississippians did this. It's like this household did this.
You would expect to see power tools with borders, and you did. But some of the structures had 80 power tools.
Right.
So you're making a composite power tool mat.
Sure.
Oh yeah, she had a heck of a time. Mine was easier. I had 4 or 5 vessels per house, and she was trying to split these into,
Oh, yeah. No,
simplify it down to where it makes sense, even to stack it up.
I was
Oh
just
no,
curious,
yeah, I get it.
looking,
No,
Like trying in my mind, right? I'm like looking at all 5 of these, right? And I'm superimposing them on each other, and it's like playing with the floor is lava, trying to get
Yes.
to your house, you know? And it's like that's probably not necessarily the case. But
absolutely not.
Right.
No.
But there were some really interesting ones, like that, the structure that had the vessels in a line running from, I think it was 175. Do you have a picture?
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That line.
I was going to talk about that one. 'Cause, yeah.
I mean, there were interesting things that you would have to move around
Right.
in the house.
Yeah. But we were looking for overall patterns of,
yeah, no, yeah.
but it didn't work out so well. But now, talk about next. I just want to show you guys a few good examples of burned house floors and actual, household assemblages. And first was 175, but that's a good one. There were lithic items concentrated into about 5 clusters. 2 of these clusters were tucked neatly along the structure's long walls. They appeared to reflect caches of general utility tools. The material cluster along the structure's northwest short wall was more intrusive into the general living area. It was made up of a group of lithic items shown here that, among other things, indicate a focus on ground stone manufacture and maintenance. Among the tools in this cluster are multiple unfinished celts and pipes, groundstone tools awaiting repair, and 4 chert hammers. These artifacts and the configuration of the cluster fit well with an interpretation of this as an active work area for groundstone maintenance, a work area.
So this is the house that you don't want to be in.
No, it would be.
Loud,
And there'd be
and
like,
there's crap everywhere in your eyes.
so they must have cleaned, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. The household's ceramic assemblage is primarily located at the opposite end of the house from the lithic work area. There were 8 vessels, including 3 bottles and 4 jars, located in or near the southeast corner, along with a pottery trowel. 3 other jars were near the center of the house, one being a large storage jar with a red slipped exterior found next to an interior pit. One of these 3 jars was found crushed where it lay, near the water storage jar, but pieces of it were actually found 4 meters away near the western wall trench. This strange distribution of ceramic debris occurred somewhat regularly in the house, which we assume, not just the houses, which we assume is, again, the house comes down, smashes the vessel, it goes everywhere. And nearly all the vessels, like I said before, they were crushed and they almost all had pieces missing. So, such is life.
Or death.
That's true, you're right. Okay. This tended to make the identification of whole pots at the time of the house destruction kind of difficult, like I said, since by the time the fire was through with them, they were nearly all broken and incomplete. So it was sort of a guessing game of, was this one whole? Was this maybe a curated large jar? most of them will probably hold jars in use, but I'm convinced some of them were curated, broken bases of jars they were using as bowls, because why throw it away if it's useful or something? So another interesting household we can talk about is 158, which was built during the second village expansion. The structure had 5 distinct clusters of lithic artifacts mapped around the perimeter. One is, let's see, yep, I'm on the right one. One is a dense cluster of tools and debris placed among several posts, one of which was set in a pit. This cluster was mapped near the structure's west end and is roughly in line with 2 short interior wall trenches. A sandstone block pipe carved in the shape of a head and a large sandstone mortar were part of this cluster. This is clearly not a typical toolkit. The position of this material amid what would have been several posts raises the possibility that this was a permanent installation in the structure. One of the other clusters is a very tightly spaced grouping near the building's southeast corner. There you go. It includes a sandstone elbow pipe and a biface made of exotic chert. The other 3 clusters include 2 tool caches and a cluster of debris. The household ceramic assemblage was located mainly in the northern half of the house. Let's see. Here, although debris, okay, yeah. Issues of debris. Was it garbage? Was it once upon a time whole? There is a concentration of jars in the northwest quadrant in particular. In the southwest corner, there's another example of a large red-lipped storage jar. Along the southern wall of the house, more piles of ceramic debris. They were designated as vessels in the field, which is why it's always questionable. In the field, apparently they thought it looked like it was a whole vessel. Once we get it into the lab, it was a bag or box of crushed sherds. Maybe they were right. Maybe we were wrong. But we map it. It's debris now. Yeah, so that's too bad for that one. But, structure 165. Here's another pretty house floor with this one, I think. I'm trying to figure out which half of this is. So this half is shown here. Okay, excavated. Just wanted you to see the pretty things on the floors before they're actually dug up. Unlike 175 and 158, structure 165 doesn't have discrete clusters, though, of lithic artifacts on the floor. They were concentrated around a large subfloor pit near the center of the east wall. A group of 4 arrow points is located near the pit, as was a large metate. 2 groups of several cobble tools, an unfinished groundstone item, and an abrader each flank the pit. A large sandstone mortar was present with these items on one side. Together, these items suggest groundstone manufacture and maintenance. A Madison Point, a celt, paired sandstone, all abraders, and another piece of unfinished groundstone were recovered from the pit too, apparently pushed in by the collapsing structural posts. A pick is tucked alone next to a wall trench. Where is that now?
There.
Okay.
The self-looking.
Okay.
I don't know if
That's what I thought.
we ended up calling it the self-looking.
Okay.
Is that a what? Point?
It's kind of a siltstone.
Siltstone.
Yeah, it's burned.
All right. Aside from a clear floor space in the southeast quadrant, that might reflect an entryway. We thought maybe, we weren't really sure. Material is scattered across the entire floor. Cobble tools, abraders, scrapers, minerals, and just an assortment of debris are all present across the floor of this one. The vessel assemblage was located primarily in the west half of the structure, although ceramic debris was found, again, throughout the east wall trench as well. 11 vessels appear to have been abandoned in place. This one had an enormous ceramic assemblage, actually. Out of these, there were 5 jars, 2 plates, a pan, a pinch pot, and they were located in corners and near walls, except a few near the center. So the haphazard arrangement of the artifacts on this floor may say something about the structure's function or activities taking place. We were thinking maybe these people had some forewarning, maybe they grabbed their stuff, kicked some things, broke it over. We don't really know, but it was a thought. Oh, here's ceramics. Okay. So, moving on to the chronology of Orendorf. Placing this thing in some type of culture. Oh, what's up?
Just nothing, looking at your posture.
It is in size. These things were pretty badly damaged.
It's not painted with, I mean, that's just the way it's worn, right? The differential wearing and smudging,
They were almost all powdery, eroded, all of the ceramics, because they'd all been burned. So, but yeah. Let's see. Oh, okay. So first, the Central Illinois Mississippians. Their timeline is based on the American Bottom timeline. And recent dates have pushed the American Bottom Sterling phase. We have this new chronology worked out to about 1100 AD, which moved the chronology of the Spoon River, Central Illinois went from 1050 to 11. So Evelyn phase, we think, is like 1100 AD. About 100 years later, Orendorf phase lasts for maybe 75 years, give or take a quarter century, because that's all wishy-washy. But the earliest people, the Evelyn phase, I think were just Cahokians almost immediately wandering up to the Central Illinois River Valley and bringing with them the Cahokian lifestyle, the maize agriculture, central plazas, the village layouts, and all that kind of recognizable American Bottom stuff. But what did they become over the multiple generations, and what was their pattern of settlement? Who were those living inside and outside the palisade at Orendorf is what sort of the end questions are. And I've read Tom Emerson's conclusions, so I'll share with you what he says, what the conclusions of Orendorf will be with input, I'm sure. So it's been clearly observed that as time went on and the generations came and went, the Spoon River Mississippian populations developed a pattern of life similar to, but obviously distinctive from, their ancestors from down south. The house assemblages tell us a great deal about the activities of the inhabitants, but the community layout and the use of space tells us more about how the society itself was organized. The Orendorf site dates show a settlement restricted in time, yet with multiple large settlements in one area. And traditionally, people have argued that you would have a settlement, and of course, you eat up everything and you use up all your resources, so the settlement moves, and that maybe they shift from place to place. But at Orendorf, you have all these large settlements in such a short period of time. They didn't have time, you would think, to live for a while, use everything up, move somewhere else, have this place renew, and come back. So there has been a different theory postulated in the conclusions of Orendorf that maybe they had a different settlement pattern. So the initial settlement D, let's get back, had about 25 houses, 57 to 73 residents. Okay, with an elite residence too, and then the settlement expanded twice until the population was somewhere between 200, 400, something like that. During these expansions, the elite household seems to be replaced by instead a large community structure, and other special use structures were actually spread around the village, which Tom suggests is showing a shift from an initial smaller community based around an elite to more people coming in and then sharing power. And there's the communal house. There are maybe areas with other leaders, people of influence. Maybe this is supported by the fact that there's a lot of rebuilding of houses, he thinks. Like people are showing ownership of place. This is our little area, our little area, our little area. But as far as the settlements lasting in this location, he suggested that perhaps the residents that lived inside the palisade represent only a small part of the actual broader Orendorf phase community. So they are, some people live in the palisaded town, others are spread out across the countryside. They're not eating up all the resources because they're here, and this may be the place where they can come for refuge, gatherings, etc. So that they never exhaust this area because their community that they're part of is broad. And that's his sort of working theory of maybe why it's settlement. Why aren't they having to leave? Anything. So, if you have a very spread out population, you're not depleting all your resources. You can keep building. So, all right. So, the Fortified Village basically is postulating is not the home of most of the people who are part of the community. It's just a sanctuary at times. And maybe because of turmoil, more people were coming to live there and they were expanding. Because it's not just birth. It's not long enough for people to just be having so many babies that they have to expand. The households are getting bigger. The number are getting bigger. Power is being spread out. So that's sort of the theory so far of why Orendorf? And what are they doing and why are they there? Eventually, the series of settlements came to an abrupt end by a catastrophic fire, and the residents never seemed to return. There's been some debate about how the fire started. Was it an accident or an intentionally set fire? Was the settlement ritually burned? I think Amanda Butler talked about that at some point. Maybe they closed it. There's lots of ideas of how it could be. So, most likely, we think, after analyzing the materials and considering all the facts, that it was probably intentionally burned by an enemy during an attack with very little warning. There are a few reasons why we think this is the most likely explanation. We already know from the burial evidence that there was violence in the area at the time. Many of the dead, like I said, showed evidence of having been violently attacked and murdered. And obviously there's a reason for all these palisades we see around. Orendorf was no different than a lot of occupations in the time period. It was fortified, expanding. They lived in a tumultuous time. But beyond these things, there are numerous materials found on the floors, demonstrating that this was a rapid abandonment. They left everything they owned behind. They didn't pack up and leave. They had to flee. And I hadn't mentioned this one yet, but they left a dead body behind. On the floor of structure 208, there is a dead guy laid out, presumably, there he is, this guy. And he was just burned in the house. So they just left him. So they probably wouldn't do that. They probably wouldn't decide to burn their village to the ground and leave the dead body there. It would make sense if you were under pressure and you had to get the hell out of there quickly, that you wouldn't have time to pack up the corpse necessarily. So there's that. They left all their stuff. And there is the center post in the village. The center post is, where are we here? It is around here. Now I can't remember exactly, but it's spatially isolated. And if there was just a fire that accidentally broke out, it burned, first of all, apparently nobody tried to put it out. So that's weird. But also, someone must have taken fire to that pole and burned it. So it would make sense. They were under attack. The whole place burned. They burned the center post. The residents didn't have time to pack up any of their stuff or even bury Grandpa. They just had to leave. So that basically is the working theory of what happened at Orendorf. And it sounds bad, but the unfortunate circumstances surrounding the site destruction had the fortunate consequence of preserving it for us. The site is now completely gone. It was decimated by mining operations, but Larry, Tom, Dwayne, Sharon, Jeanette Stevens, all of the multitude of people and all the high school students and college students helped save a huge portion of it before that could happen, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. So I'll finally shut up. And thanks to you, Larry, and all of your workers, and thanks, guys.